All right, I'd like to talk now about some surface layout techniques or some surface patch structure concepts. So when I get a job similar to this, where I might have and it could be a whole front end, but in this case, it's a fender, and I need to apply surfaces. So Bezier surfaces to this scan of a fender shape that a designer has predetermined. So I look at a couple of things, some features of it, and I start immediately to break down in my mind where I would be placing surfaces. So I see that there's a feature line here that vanishes into smoothness, and the same here. Okay, so that's something to definitely be concerned with. I see kind of a main feature here, right? Main slab probably coming in from this way, main kind of ball nose shape over here, so this section maybe being dragged up and down. I know I've got a transition with an OG in it, so a reverse in curvature from positive to negative curvature. So these are the kind of things I begin to pay attention to when I'm going to develop a surface structure. So I'll go to a view over here that I've decided on, and in this case I just have my colored surface turned on, and I'd like to turn on some curvature analysis also. And what this allows me to do is kind of visualize where the positive and negative shapes are in this surface, and might assist me in drawing my structure. So I'm just going to use a pencil here, and I don't really want to use red right now. I want to maybe start with black here. I know I have a section here, and it doesn't really matter where you start necessarily, but my end goal is to try to determine what I'm going to do in this area. So I'm going to start with the simplest things. One of those simplest things is this section needs to be dragged all the way through here. So I would just do that by trying to fit a curve along this area, right? How much downturn it has at this end, or whether this goes straight, that doesn't matter, but just generally that shape. Now I know I have another curve here that's kind of the main bone line or the main structure of this edge, so I'll just draw that curve in also. Okay. Now I know in this area it's probably not usable because we're already going to be into this transition. Okay, so I won't concern myself with that right now, and I know that that's where my section is going to end. And while I'm right here, if I'm going to use, maybe I'll use blue for my tangent line. So I know that up around in here somewhere, I'm going to need a tangent line up there. Okay. Now I'll go back to my primary color. I know I have a section coming through here. That section wants to be moved along in this area, probably until it hits this tangent line. And then I'll want to go down this way. So I'm just going to strike a curve there, kind of an extrusion of that section along those two lines. At the front, maybe this is a key character line right here, so I might fit that line right there. Then I see that I've got, probably this tangent line wants to line up, so I'm going to switch to my tangent line color, maybe put this tangent line in along here. Okay, I don't know in this case that I'm going to drop down and build this, that same section. I might just drag this section up those two curves. Okay. I know that another fixed line I have is this wheel opening line, so I'm just going to draw that wheel arch in, and then I'm going to skip right over here and draw its companion in. So that's the flat that runs around this wheel arch. All right, and my last is this tangent line over here, which I can see this becomes negative and then positive, and I'm going to make that out of one surface. So I need a tangent line drawn this way. Okay. So I'm going to be constructing a surface from then this tangent line over to that opening line. So we could run a blue kind of around that if we wanted. And then I also know that that from here to here is going to be a section. Now, where does this section stop up here? Well, it has to stop at this point, and then it kind of comes down, and I want kind of a nice 90-degree angle here. So I'm just going to draw a curve and maybe draw a curve across here. Okay, that's my basic surface structure. All right, I know that this surface will be continuous across this boundary. Those two surfaces will be curvature. These two surfaces will be curvature. Okay, I know that along this portion of this line right here, these two surfaces have an angle. All right, so that means that if I'm going to build this transition next, and I'm going to put a transition in from here that's going to be continuous across this, if these two surfaces, which I'm building other surfaces curvature continuous to, aren't continuous here, they definitely aren't going to be continuous as it starts here or here. Okay, so they really won't be continuous in this area or this area. So how do we handle that? And really an area that we have of concern is right here. Okay, what's a concept we can use right there? Well, I'm just going to switch here to maybe just switch to a little different view that I've got a couple of things already drawn in, and I'll go ahead and turn my curvature back on. So I know right here, this is where we just talked about, the two surfaces will not be continuous across this area. Okay, so the red surface, so this surface will be continuous to this slab, and the green surface, or this surface, will be continuous across this slab, and together along this line they will not be continuous. Okay, so I know right here is kind of where my line goes, and I'm just looking at the red splotchiness, and I might come across from something like, maybe I'll come across in here up to this area, right? Just connect that. That's my four sides, trying to keep this angle 90. Okay, now what that's going to do is take this angle, still this angle, and it's going to start to bring that angle flatter and flatter until it becomes continuous here and here. Okay, and I'll show you how we're going to do that. So I've got a couple of surfaces already made. You know, we don't need to, we've already fit surfaces. So here's my surface set, okay? And I also have the curve that I used to bridge that gap. Okay, so that's just a pretty simple curve that I used. It's the edge, really, of this surface. Okay, so if I turn my STL file back on, and I can see where my red radius stops, and I get my construction curve on, I'm just going to go ahead and say, hey, right along this curve right here, I will project this on the surface, but as this red, bright red, goes away, maybe somewhere in this area, I'm going to drop down to this curve, somewhere maybe like that. All right, and I'm going to try to pick the same thing on this side. So I see where my tight radius is. I think that goes along to somewhere maybe here. And then I'm going to come over to this guy, maybe right there. Okay, just trying to keep 90 degrees right there. I'll turn off my shading and go, I want to go to an orthographic mode, because my next step is to start to dice up these curves. I'll use curve, section, and segment mode, and I'll segment that curve at these two lines. Okay, now I've got some geometry to work with. So I'll project those curves on, and I'm going to do it view-based onto this slab, project these curves. I can now stash those curves on my construction layer and turn that off. And now I'd go straight for my square tool. And the reason square is because I'm blending between four boundaries. This is an arc, this is kind of flat, this is an S, or with an OG, reverse in curvature, and this is an arc. Okay, so I want to blend between those four. In that case, I'll use my square tool. I'm just going to reset it so it's at defaults. Okay, I'll go to G0 here, and I'm going to pick the boundaries. Okay, and that makes a surface. Boundary number 1, I know I want curvature. Boundary number 3, I know I want curvature. Okay. Boundary number 4 and number 2, those are just an angle, so that's okay. And I'll use my explicit control, and we've got degree 5 by 5. Okay. So I'm going to turn my control vertices on and just have a look at this surface. The CV structure looks pretty good. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and add in maybe an extra row here and see if I can get some continuity. So if I add an extra row in each direction, I get my continuity. But I'd like to take a little bit closer look at that. And whenever I add extra rows, so in this case, I've got 3 rows to control this curvature, 3 rows to control this curvature, nothing really to control this center row of curvature. So I'll use some of my viewing diagnostic tools like non-proportional scaling to look at that arrangement of control vertices. And maybe I'll turn on my curvature combs also. So what this starts to let me see is by foreshortening this view and looking down these rows of control vertices, and I'll turn my curvature off for a second, I can see there's some strange distortions in this surface. So I'd like to control that interior transition. So I'm going to just try to move a couple of these boundaries, blends, and see if I can get a better shape in here. So that's going pretty good right there. Maybe I've got a little tweak in these two, but if we look at that comb now, okay, and I'll turn my non-proportional scaling off, now we've got kind of a nice OG. If we go back to 0.5, see how we've got a kind of a flatness in the curvature in here, and then it accelerates, and then the OG is moving around. What's another way we can look at that OG? Well, I'm just going to trim this surface back temporarily, and we'll turn our STL file off just so we can have a look at this. Okay, I lost my surface, so let's put him on here. All right, and let's have a look at this. Maybe using diagnostic shading curvature, and we'll talk more about curvature. But if I look at this and we look at maybe maximum curvature, it shows me that, hey, that looks pretty good. If we look at maybe mean curvature, now we can see where negative to positive curvature is, okay? And we can see how there's a little strangeness right here. I'm going to turn on the used bands, which kind of over-exaggerates that. So right now we're at 0.5. We saw that when I corrected my curvature combs, and they are not turning on right now for some reason, but when I corrected my curvature combs and fixed these control vertices, right, it looked better in a curvature plot. So if I just pick this and I turn my curvature combs on, and let's just see here if we got a scale issue or a samples issue. Not sure why my combs aren't turning on. But as I adjust this, and we were at 0.75 before, you see that the combs, those adjusted and looked well, and now I've got some pretty nice looking curvature plots. So these are different than black and white bars, and different than iso angle, and different than the light tunnel, right? They're different than all of those. But we've got a curvature plot now that looks pretty good, okay? And if we check that for continuity again, we've got curvature, curvature, and we check for position on the other side here, and we've got position. Okay, I'll go to this side now. I'm going to use the same square tool. It's still set up, so I'll go curvature side, position side, curvature, finally position. Okay. It seems like we've got a little issue here. If we go to 5, does that make any difference? Okay, not much. Okay. So in this case, if I don't get a change between 5 and 6, I leave it at 5. Okay. Now there's no control vertex in this surface that is not being used. And what I would do at this point is delete that curve on surface. So I'm going to untrim this, remove that curve on surface, and eliminate the possibility that that was a bad curve on surface by using my G0 and projection and aligning that. Okay. Previous to that, I projected that curve on surface from a curve. Then I tried to match a surface to that projection. In this case, I'm now matching the projected curve to its original surface edge. So this allows me to achieve a higher level of continuity more easily. So if we now edit and trim this back, and we look at a couple of diagnostics here, I'll go to my perspective viewing. We could look at ISO angle, and I'll delete my locators, and we could turn our blur up just a touch. I kind of like a little blur on that, usually around 0.3. And I'll dial down my transparency so I can't see so well my edges, but I still know where they are. So I can see if an edge, my eye can be attracted to this edge, and I can look at the continuity across the boundary and judge if it's good. And as you see here, see how we just nicely split apart from being continuous? Okay, same at this side. All right, so all our transition is being done in this one surface. And we've gone ahead and taken care that in these views, our control vertices also look nice and have a nice positive to negative layout. So we don't get any low spots in the middle, okay? So it's important to note, and again, a great way to determine it is by looking across the horizon of these CVs. So I'm looking at this, and I'll put this flat on my screen, okay? And I notice that that's a nice arc. Then I'll look at the next row, and I'll put the ends of it flat on my screen. And you can use the bottom of the screen to help. Okay, so I'm just lining up this CV and this CV to the bottom of the screen, and then look and see if that's a nice arc. And what do we see right here? Okay, I've got a little issue. So I'm going to take this surface, delete its construction history, all right, and I'm just simply going to move straight in the width, which is up, my Y, and I'm going to add, again, you can come in here and adjust your mouse sensitivity. I'm going to add a little crown to him. I'll take the next row, flatten it on the screen, add some crown. Okay, take the next row, this row, flatten it on the screen. See, we go up, then flat right here. So we can go up a little bit with this, but you can never be above any of these CVs. Otherwise, if you go above, you have a negative in here, okay? Now this last row right here, we could pull him down. Now how would we know if that should be pulled down? Okay, this is where you can use your angle checking. So I'll use angle tangent, and I'm going to check the continuity between here, and I'm going to look at how that angle transitions. Okay, so it's possible if I go back to my non-proportional scaled viewing, okay, this control vertex is not necessarily in the correct spot. There is some wiggle room. So I might take this control vertex and push it down just a little bit, and maybe raise this one up just a little bit, just to smooth that out a touch. If this angle locator right here had some really strange, spikes in it, or it went low and then came back up, we would know we needed some work to do, okay? And you could perform the same diagnostic on this surface. But in this case, since we only had 5 control vertices, these are all basically used. So if we have a good relationship between here and between those control vertices, we should have a good transition in here, okay? And if we do a little non-proportional scaling on this, and we look at some of these, you have nice arc. Do the next one, arc, maybe a touch flat right there. We might be able to bump that one up. Nice arc. This next one, get a little flatness in there. Okay, we're getting in some bending and some skewing because these are not collinear. So as this goes up, it'll change position. I think those control vertices are pretty nicely laid out, and I think our overall shape is quite good. All right, so let's all go ahead and give that a try.